Imu has descended, and with it we have finally gotten confirmation that Imu is almost certainly the Sea Devil, the origin of devil fruits. But this is such a big deal that there's so many little connections and details that you may not have noticed in how this ties things together and how Imu even came to be, such as how Imu might be responsible behind Harold's turnover, as well as a lot of linguistic nuances such as how Imu's speech pattern works or the names of Imu's attacks that likely got lost in translation, so let's break it all down right now. On the cover, Yamato finally reaches Emma's shrine in the middle of Hakumai, where Yasuya's katana is meant to be laid to rest to serve as his grave, as one has the tradition of taking one's sword to the grave with them, with the people of Ringo even using them as grave markers. As a reminder, this is a small shrine found in the middle of the Hakumai region, now ruled by Daimyo Kawamatsu, where Zoro and Hiyori found refuge after escaping from the flower capital during Yasuya's execution. The shrine is named after Enma, the god of hell in Wano folklore, in reality a relic of Buddhism, and the one after which Zoro's sword was later named as well. Yamato was asked by Kinemon to travel all the way to Hakumai to leave this sword, so after this the only destination left is Ringo, where Yamato should meet with what likely will be Daimyo Kiku and come to the decision about the end of this journey. The chapter opens up with the children's parents all rushing towards them but being unable to touch their kids due to Summer's thorns. Interestingly though, this page is partially unfinished, at least in the magazine release, though more subtly than you might imagine. If you look closely, you'll notice a considerable amount of lines and drawings spilling out of the panels, including the edges of entire characters, which are usually cleaned out after drawing. Similarly, the sound effects in the top middle panel are blended in with the character in a way that they're almost unreadable. It's unknown what caused this mistake, whether it was a lack of time to polish these final details like that Kuma chapter, or if they accidentally didn't submit the finished version, but it's likely this will be fixed in the volume release. As Imu floats upwards though, likely thanks to the wings, she finds the commotion annoying, and so launches a powerful blast of Conqueror's Haki, which we can assume Imu is doing through Gunko's body, confirming Imu as a Conqueror's Haki user. This was already established earlier by the use of the bari bari sound effect, which represents the cracking of thunder and is used to show strong Haki, such as Gaban having this sound effect last chapter too. This sound effect was already present last chapter as soon as Imu appeared, so Imu's very appearance commands strong Haki. And similarly, the same sound effect was used when the legs of Saturn appeared from the abyss, showing that powerful Haki is manifested during a summoning. In this case though, the sound effect bari bari is drawn way more intensely and way more defined, likely showing that the Haki is even stronger. But if those with the mark can use Conqueror's Haki, then it might be thanks to their link with Imu rather than them natively having Conqueror's Haki, as I assume this is Imu's Haki and not Gunko's Conqueror's Haki. This might explain why the Gorosei were able to use Conqueror's Haki in Egghead, seemingly all of them, as we saw at least Warcury, Saturn, and Mars using it, so presumably all of them can. However, while I do not question their ambition, it would be weird if all 5 of them happen to have it, since only 1 in several million awakened Conqueror's Haki compared to the little population of celestial dragons, so perhaps it might make more sense if it was part of the extension granted by Imu's powers. Though perhaps with their bodies the effect of the Haki might be more limited, as Imu's Haki knocks out the parents, the children, and even some of the giant warrior pirates, which, while impressive, is a far cry from Joy Boy's Haki, which virtually knocked out all Marines on Egghead aside from Kizaru, an admiral. By the way, the pirate getting knocked out by Imu's Haki looks a lot like Raideen, a giant that had been training Hyrule during Big Mom's flashback and had originally appeared as far back as the Little Garden flashback as well, but it's hard to say from this small panel if it's really him. And at last, we finally get to witness Imu's true form. Well, partially. Imu is still only possessing Gonko's body, so it's not the same as seeing full Imu in action, but this transformation certainly gives us a very good idea of who Imu really is. And I've been saying this for years now, I've theorized this for the longest time, but at this point there's pretty much no doubt left. The king of the world, Nerna Imu, is almost certainly the Sea Devil, the entity cited as the origin of devil fruits. The appearance is unmistakable as defined by a few key traits. As we had long since speculated, Imu looks not just like the devil, but specifically a cartoon devil. For one, there are the gigantic bat-like wings, a symbol of the devil. The triangular tail, a sign of devil, and something that is most likely what we already had guessed, the very same triangular tail that originally killed King Cobra, one that may have been extended in some form to Gunko's powers as the Ara no Mi, but there's no doubt here that this one here is the original that Imu used to assassinate Cobra. And finally, the Devil's Trident, a symbol often associated with the devil, especially when its ends are pointed like a devil's tail. The trident is also often a symbol of the sea, which could connect with the identity of the Sea Devil. By the way this is displayed as well, this is likely to be Imu's hybrid form, if it even operates like a devil fruit that is. I also wonder if Imu is flying with the wings, or if literally just has some weird levitation power. This thing, however, is what we mentioned last week, being the longer hair. Back then it was perhaps arguable by some, but here it's undoubtable. Gunko's hair has extended considerably from before, seemingly to match Imu's form. Since the devil isn't really associated with having long hair, this seems to be a trait more similar to Imu rather than to the devil powers. We suggest that Imu could be a woman with long hair, though admittedly a long man with long hair too, but given the way it looks here with Gunko, let's run with the assumption of woman for now. If Imu were to be a woman though, this would cause an incongruence. Ivankov stated that 800 years ago, Saint Nerona Imu was a saint, but in One Piece female celestial dragons use a term like saintess, which, while not much of a thing in English, in Japanese, male celestial dragons use sei or saint, while female celestial dragons like Shalria use gu. What would be saintess though, more accurately it is closer to something like princess or high lady, meaning that unless Ivankov was wrong, the original Nerona Imu seemingly was a human king, a man. But that was 800 years ago, and so Imu's gender could have changed across those years, or even potentially Imu's own body could have changed. Because something we've speculated for a long time, despite the skepticism of many, is that Imu may have traded places with Nefertari Lily given his obsession with her, literally switching bodies, and might even explain why Imu would have such a massive portrait of her in Marijois if it is a self-portrait. This actually makes a lot of sense, as when Doflamingo spoke of the living national treasure of Marijois during Dressrosa, which we know from Japanese to be Imu themselves, he brought up two elements of the Ope Ope no Mi that would be vital in taking control of Imu's body: the personality switching operation and the perennial youth operation. And the second is something Ivankov already implied Imu has. So what if Imu went 2 for 2 and used the personality switching operation, which we had seen in Punk Hazard, to swap bodies with Lily? Well, for the moment being, at least under Gunko's body, I'll use her for Imu. This might explain though why Imu decided to possess Gunko rather than Summers or Kiringam, as Imu might just be more comfortable in a female's body at this point. Even more oddly though, as we've explained before, Imu has a very bizarre speech pattern in Japanese. Imu seems to use very archaic and dated language, yet at the same time speaks rudely and crassly like an angry prepotent child. For example, within this chapter alone, Imu uses the term wappadomo to refer to the children, which is an incredibly archaic term to refer to a child that is simply incredibly rare to be seen in use in modern Japanese today. And for example, one that, while I could deduce its meaning, I myself hadn't even heard of before, and something I can imagine even many Japanese speakers today may be very unfamiliar with the closest English examples I can think of being juveniles or younglings, though even more archaic and unknown. This old speech obviously gives the idea that Imu has been around for a long time, as Imu also tends to end sentences with nu, which is a sign in Japanese that someone is very, very old. It's something that in anime you would usually see with the trope of like the 800-year-old dragon girl or something like that to show that someone is incredibly ancient. Furthermore, Imu uses the first-person pronoun mu, as we've mentioned last chapter, but also uses the second-person pronoun nushia to refer to others. Nushia isn't a real pronoun in Japanese as far as I'm aware of, but it is likely derived from the real pronoun onushi, which is an archaic second-person pronoun often associated associated with rulers speaking to their subordinates, except here it lacks the honorific O, so it comes off as even more rude, and took off what was an already condescending term and made it sound even more rude, as Imu sees all those beneath as inferior. Even more interesting of note though is that in this chapter we see Kinningam and Summers referring to Imu as ontai. Ontai is a rather peculiar term that is used to refer to one's superior, usually a politician, leader of a company, or an expert in their field, though it is a particularly interesting term to refer to a king as, rather than something like Heika, your majesty, since previously all we had is Imu-sama, which is just applying an honorific, so it was translated as either Great Imu or King Imu. By the way, keep in mind that regardless of if Imu is a man or woman, the term King of the World in One Piece is used as gender neutral, such as Carrot being the king of Zou. You could translate ontai here as something like great leader, but it's not the easiest term to translate. As a quick side tangent, when Kinningam addresses Imu, he speaks incredibly politely, in a tone far more reserved than what he used earlier with his colleagues, which makes sense, as if he were speaking to royalty, which he basically is. He explains that he's opened up several nightmare holes, which are written phonetically in katakana as those English words, and are written with the kanji Akumuana, which means the same in Japanese, just nightmare holes. From these holes, the Mumas are continually regenerated, as we see the very Fenrir that Sol defeated reappearing again, making their onslaught endless. Either way though, going back to the previous argument, Imu being largely confirmed to be the devil explains a lot about her current powers. Beyond the devil's tail we saw used to kill Cobra, we also saw Imu transforming into a large-jawed creature, though we also witnessed a semi-transformed state, similar to that of the Gorosei, in which they very slowly morph into their devil forms, something the anime also showed is a slow process where they attain this blob-like shape, what some originally mistook as just being shadowing. However, doesn't this silhouette remind you of something? Because quite clearly it is incredibly similar to the depiction of the devil shown in the Harley, what as we assumed is most likely a depiction of the sea devil, and in turn Imu represented with the same large devil wings. According to what Ivankov said, Saint Nerona Imu was supposedly originally a human king who became one of the 20 founders of the world government. So it doesn't seem like Imu was originally born as a devil, but rather became one along the way, either through the power of a fruit or likely at some point as part of the origin of devil fruits itself, particularly as the sea devil was cited as the point of origin of all devil fruits. In chapter 19, Shanks explained the myth of devil fruits relates to these fruits being the supposed incarnations of the sea devil. Eating these fruits grants you the powers of the devil, but in turn the sea also rejects you for having attained its powers to the point water itself rejects you, paradoxically enough if the sea is meant to be the sea devil itself. The concept and entity of the devil though, especially as depicted here through Imu, is something that dates even way further back than the Void Century. If we assume that the One Piece world is much like ours or potentially even the same, the concept of the devil is one that dates to times immemorial. While a figure of many different religions, the concept of the devil has existed across so many different cultures and religions. While different cultures worship different gods, all share a common fear for the figure that to them embodies the devil, the personification of evil itself and a manifestation of humanity's own fears. Some call it Satan, others Lucifer, Iblis, or Beelzebub, some even associated with the figure of Lilith, what some believe to be the origin of the concept of a bad-winged devil, a name that is eerily similar to that of Nefertari Lili. All of these different tales and myths of the devil from across history may have been lost in the finer details across the tides of time, particularly after the world underwent its first calamity. However, traces and ideas of it remained, and at the very least, the unified idea of the devil, the incarnation of all evil, persisted across history, and likely took form into whatever Imu became. Even within the story, we've seen mentions of the devil time and time again as a concept, some treating it like a myth, others using expressions such as she's like a devil, or likening others to the devil itself, such as Ors, who was considered so fearsome that some even call him the devil incarnate, and others outright worshipping the devil like the people of Haraheta Lucania, where Brooke went during the time skip. As such, I firmly believe that the Sea Devil as we currently know it is the incarnation of all the ideologies of the devil across history, fundamentally an incarnation of all the fears of humanity made manifest, sort of similar to the concept of Chainsaw Man's devils, if that makes sense. And as such, I have to ask myself the question, is Imu a human who attained the powers of the devil to further his greedy ambitions, or was Imu even outright taken by the devil, perhaps something similar to a failed Zoan awakening, and is now nothing more than the incarnation of all the evil and fear of humanity? I think I would prefer if Imu still had some control, but it would be ironic if Imu depriving others of their individuality was someone who lost their own individuality as well. Regardless of which, even if Imu is still in control, I really believe that Imu represents not just some personal evil interests, but the accumulated evil of all of mankind. Particularly iconic though is the devil's presence in the tale of Genesis, where in some sources it took the form of a snake and deceived Eve into biting into the forbidden fruit of knowledge, resulting in Adam and Eve's expulsion from the Garden of Eden. In a similar way, Imu may have done the same within this future too. Imu used the devil fruits of what may be the devil fruit tree Eve to tempt others as the devil, resulting in the expulsion of the Lunaria from the top of the red line, and now trying to take control of the Adam tree as well. The difference here is that Imu then seized control and placed himself firmly as the king of the world. Imu somehow tricked the entire planet into believing the celestial dragons are gods like a religious cult, when in reality it's a cult of literal devils that took control of the reins of the world. And to oppose it, the complete opposite figure needs to stand against Imu, the sun god Nika, the god that encompasses the good and joy of humanity, and it is an agglomeration of all of people's faiths. If Nika represents all the hope of humanity, the good parts of religions and people's faith for a better world, then Imu encompasses all the cruelty of mankind, the horrors of manipulative dominant religions, and people's greatest fears embodied incarnate. Regardless, even just beyond appearance, it is clear that Imu's powers relate to the old depictions and ideals of devils that we mentioned earlier. Imu can seemingly summon pentagrams. From within, items can appear, such as summoning cannons to fire cannonballs at the giants. These pentagrams have writing on them similar to the Abyss, what seem to be a language similar to Latin letters, but with some differences. Imu is also able to summon what looks like a Grand Grimoire, being the magic book used in the myth of the Goetian grimoires to summon devils. In this case, Imu summons from the book a gun and small dagger, though one of immense size to be able to shoot Broggy's arm cleanly off. Goofy as the idea of just pulling a gun like a cartoon, in this not only shows that Imu's powers have immense versatility for combat, but also that they quite similarly mimic Nika's cartoonish powers. As we've long since established, Imu's cartoonish depiction of the devil clearly parallels that of the sun god Nika's cartoonish superhero appearance, and as such, following this theme of nightmares with all the Mumas, this fear of a cartoonish devil almost embodies the fears of a child. Given all this, I also wonder if Gunko's fear of Nika was actually Gunko's fear, or maybe it was Imu's own memories and implanted control that showed that Nika is Imu's greatest fear. But more than anything, Imu has the power to grant what she calls the Aku no Chikara, the power of evil. Though it should be noted that evil in Japanese, Aku, much like English actually, forms part of the word for devil, Akuma. Imu claims that in exchange for freezing their aging, they will attain immortality and increased strength under the dominance of Mu. It's not fully clear if this is the same as giving them the mark or a simplified version of it compared to the God Knights, though it's hard to say given how on one hand they appear different, but on the other given how much Gunko seemed to be missing her similar memories, so it might be the same power but just applied different, particularly as Imu claims to rid them of their common sense and make them live as devils, Akuma. More specifically though, this technique is called Akuaru Domi Reversi. The first half is written in Japanese with the katakana Akuaru, which, while confusing as it's basically just complete gibberish, is likely meant to be a pun on the Japanese words Aku and Waru, which both mean evil, literally making it mean evil evil. The kanji, however, reads as akuma keiyaku, which translates to deal with the devil, so whatever akuaru means, it must relate to this meaning. And this also confirms what we expected, that the mark literally is a deal with the devil. The other half, though, being also the title of the chapter, domi reversi, more simply derives from Latin, which means to return home, though more specifically it can also mean to return to one's original form. Now this could open up ideas whether devils are the original form of people, but given the kanji reading reads as kuroten shihai, which translates to darkening domination, it's likely that this domi just stands for domination, rather than domus, Latin for home, and thus this might just mean a reversal of who is dominating them. This is fitting, as this shihai is the same that Imu used at the end of last chapter, claiming that she'd show them the dominance of God, so we're quite literally seeing that in action here through a move that literally involves dominance, and also literally reversing, as those sucked by it are literally reversed, flipped upside down, turned into an immortal devil, whose broken hand begins to regenerate. Other giants also end up being transformed, and according to one of the giants, it is simply due to being between their range, though we don't know if this is the case of if Imu did it, because if this acts like a contagious virus, it's even more broken. I assume there's a limit to this based on Haki as always, so someone like Luffy wouldn't be turned, but the fact that two monsters like Brogy and Dory, with bounties over 1 billion, were caught so easily makes for a concerning turn of events. The movie is also likely literally referencing the game Reversi itself, as the giants stuck between the two devils are reversed just like in the game, which once again shows how goofy Imu's powers can be, just like Nika's. As we see in the final page, Imu seems to confer the power of evil to some of the Mumas as well, making them even larger or have demonic features, including a terrifying powered-up version of the mom. However, in all this context, it's easy to forget how this may explain older plotlines. Particularly, we've always questioned why there was an abyss in the throne room of Orest Castle, but now knowing that Imu can literally turn people evil, there's a very real chance that Harold's betrayal was a lot more straightforward than we thought. What if instead of simply being a bad king that pretended to be good all along, he truly was good all this time, but was simply reversed by Imu, and so Loki had no other option but to kill him. And then the government shelved the matter until later, because that's how politicians operate. In retrospect, it also makes sense why the symbol of the horns that Harold had as ancient giant heritage may be associated with evil, as not only Ors was called the devil, but may be a sign of the devil too, as we see the horns here. At this point, given how things go, and given how Gyaban fell to the underworld after failing to stop Gunko, it really seems like the only option to stop Imu and her army of devils rests down to those in the underworld, likely having to team up together if they even want to put an end to this living nightmare.